In this Star Wars Jedi Survivor video, I want to give you guys some tips that I wish I would have known when I started playing this game, and they're just meant to help you have an easier, smoother experience and not waste time or get frustrated about certain things, and just help you hit the ground running. There will be mild spoilers in this video. I'm not going to get into the story or anything like that, and you might just see like some enemy types or some locations that might be mild spoilers to you, but we're not going to discuss the story whatsoever. So the first thing I want to say is that this game is very Metroidvania-esque, meaning that it's kind of got like all these open world locations that you're free to explore at your leisure, but a lot of areas in these locations you won't be able to go to certain places in that big open world because you don't have the tools available to you yet. And as you progress the main story, more and more of these tools will become available to you, allowing you to explore more and more of these areas. So if you come to an area and you're like, I don't know how to get through this part or whatever, keep continuing the main story and then come back later. If you just cannot figure something out, don't stand there for an hour. Don't Google online trying to figure out why you can't do blah. The solution is just to continue the main story. You'll gain the tool necessary and you will realize it when you get it that you need to go back to this area. And sort of piggybacking off this point, one of the things you really want to do while you're out exploring the world is make sure that you activate all the meditation sites. This is going to allow you to fast travel back to this location later. You can only fast travel from meditation sites to meditation sites. So if you miss one or you see it over there but you forget to grab it, and then later on when you've unlocked one of these tools and you're like, oh yeah, I need to go back to this place, but you forgot the meditation site, it'll take you much longer to get there and it can be quite frustrating. So make sure that you activate all meditation sites. That doesn't mean you have to rest at these sites because resting will respawn enemies, but just make sure you at least activate them. So the next point I want to talk about is the fact that there are no weapon upgrades or armor upgrades beyond cosmetic upgrades. So you're not going to be trying to get better gear. The way character progression is handled in this game is through completing the main story. As I mentioned, you'll unlock more tools that allow you to traverse the landscape a bit easier and go to places you couldn't before. It'll also give you different abilities. I won't go into it too much for spoilers, but that will increase your character's performance in combat and exploration. You'll also gain skill points from defeating enemies, including quests. You'll gain experience, and also from exploration you'll gain skill points. And this allows you to place points into your skill tree that can make you more powerful. And you'll also gain perk points, and these are acquired kind of randomly from exploration, defeating bosses. They're very few and far between at the beginning of the game, so don't expect perks to play a huge role in your build early on in the game, probably the first half. Probably more in the second half you'll see perks take place. I do want to mention here, though, that you will be able to buy perks from Z once you find her in the main story and she turns into a shop. You can use your data discs that you acquire from exploration in order to buy perks. So if you're looking for some perks, make sure you hit up her shop. If you don't have any ones that seem to fit your build, that'd be a good place to go to look for some once you have her available. But I do want to mention that you'll also gain more force, max force, and more max HP as well, skill points from exploring. So make sure you explore thoroughly when you're out on the landscape, because these are the ways you're really going to get stronger. And the reason that I bring up this point to you is that when you're doing the main storyline, the bosses on the main story are much easier than many of the legendary bosses you'll run into. The game has, you know, kind of hidden bosses around the landscape, not unlike Fallen Order had, that are much, much more challenging than the regular bosses that everyone has to face in their playthrough. So there's kind of optional difficulty if you want to go face these. And if you're having trouble on those legendary bosses, you might want to go continue the main storyline or go farm some skill points by defeating enemies, or, you know, go search for force upgrades and HP upgrades before you come back in order to, you know, be able to take on these bosses a bit more easily. And sort of related to that, one way that you can improve your character is by gaining extra heals. You'll find these like containers around the map. They're very rare, that will give you an extra heal. So every time that you rest, you replenish more heals and you'll be able to, you know, heal more in boss fights. That'll make boss fights easier for you. But one thing you can do to get an extra heal pretty quickly is the priorite that you can find around Kobo. If you gain 10 of them and you go to Domo's shop on Kobo, you can open the back door in her shop there and you'll be able to gain an extra heal really quickly. This is a great way to get one fast because it doesn't take you too long to gain 10 of these. You can probably do it in the first couple hours if you're just exploring, which I think a lot of people will. Make sure you save those instead of buying cosmetic appearances. Go buy that extra heal, especially if you're playing on the harder difficulties. That'll make your time a bit easier. So kind of moving out of the exploration and moving into the character and combat elements for a second, I want to talk about like skill points and how that all works. So as you gain experience and you defeat enemies in quests, you're going to gain skill points and you can place these into your skill tree. You are given one free respec, so don't worry too much about where your points go early on. Like, you can respec, and then after that it's one skill point to respec. And skill points aren't finite, meaning like there's only a certain number of skill points. That's not a thing in this game because you can farm XP. You can just keep farming enemies to gain more and more skill points. So don't worry about that too much. However, I will say that I would recommend picking the Survivor tree and the Force trees early on if you're not sure what lightsaber stance you like, because the Survivor and Force trees, you're going to level up anyway as the game goes on, because they're very useful, getting more Force, getting more HP, getting Force faster, allowing you to use Force abilities more often. It doesn't even really matter what style of play you're going for. These will benefit you anyway. So at the beginning of the game, if you're not sure what to do, you're not sure which lightsaber stance you want to go for, I would recommend going with points in Survivor and Force trees. And then maybe later on, if you figure out which stance you want to use, then maybe you can respec and pull some points out of there and put them into lightsaber, or you can just start dumping points into that lightsaber one that you want. And beyond that, making some very specific suggestions about what I think you should do early on, and specific points, places you should put points into in your skill tree. Confusion is a really, really good ability in this game. What this does is it kind of turns an enemy to your side, a human enemy, and makes them fight for you for a duration. And you can increase that duration by putting points into the passage there. And you can also make it so you can confuse harder and harder enemies. And obviously, the harder enemies are the best ones to confuse because they live longest, they do the most damage. So these are the ones you want to confuse if there are a bunch of enemies on the screen. So it'll take you a while to get all that unlocked. But confusion is really good. I highly recommend putting points into this early on if you don't know where to put points. That can make things for you a lot easier. One of the difficulties of this game, or the hardest parts of this game, is when you're outnumbered by a lot of enemies on the screen, and turning an enemy or two to your side can really even the odds, particularly if they're difficult enemies. So I highly, highly recommend getting the confusion ability and using that regularly. And the next thing I want to talk about is the blaster stance. This is not a stance you begin the game with. You unlock it as you progress the main story. I don't want to go into details on that, but you probably get this somewhere about 6 to 8 hours into the game if you just go straight into the main story. And then you can use the blaster stance. And why I think this is arguably the best stance in the game is that it gives you a ranged option, because you can use a blaster in one hand. So, if you're outnumbered, 4-on-1 or something like that, you can use your blaster to pick off a couple weak targets and then focus on those 1 or 2 enemies. And it allows you to, keep pressure on enemies, because there is sort of a posture system in this game where, if you break someone's guard, then you can attack them a couple times, and their guard starts to replenish if you haven't hit them in a while. The blaster gives you a way to keep depleting their guard even when you're not in range. So maybe you have to dodge away because they do some crazy attack and their guard starts building up. Well, you can just shoot them with a blaster once or twice to keep their guard from building up, and then you can get back into melee range and continue to break their guard. So it's a really, really effective stance. If you're having trouble, or if you're playing on one of the harder difficulties, I highly recommend getting blaster stance. Maybe if you're fighting a boss or a legendary enemy and you can't get through it, go get the main story and go get blaster stance and then try that. So that wraps up our Jedi Survivor beginner guide. I hope you guys got some useful information of this without getting too many spoilers. The idea here is just to give you some peace of mind going into the game, so that you can just play and not worry about, oh, should I spend an hour looking for a way around this? I know I'm missing it, or should I go online and try and find it? When, the reality is that progressing the main story is the solution to 80% of the problems in this game. So I hope you guys found it useful. Make sure you check out our review if you haven't already to see our thoughts on the game, and we also have some boss videos for some very specific bosses in the game as well.